Galleries aren't the only place vying for collectors' cash. Auction houses like Christie's, Sotheby's, and Bonhams hold regular sales.
28,000, 28 unbid, 28,000.
We visited Bonhams in the heart of London to talk to Giles Peppiatt, Director of African Art and the man behind the annual Africa Now sale, an auction focused exclusively on contemporary artwork from the continent.
All done at 54,000.
I want to talk a little bit about how you got this program started. You started back in 2006 with a South African art sale,
That's right.
That's pretty much ballooned into what you're doing today.
Well, you're absolutely right. We started in 2006 with South African art, and that was the most wonderful success. So that market is very strong. On the back of that, about a year or two later, we thought, well, let's spread the net a little bit wider. So we started to have sales of contemporary African art, which included the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. And that also has been very interesting. It's been a little more difficult, but it's been very interesting.
So the African art market, it's a young market. How do you define the value on some of these pieces?
Our job is to tell our client what we think it's worth. We come to that by essentially having to almost get into the heads of the buyers and think, well, what would they pay? And that is done through the precedent, i.e. what has this artist fetched before, and looking at the work and say, well, is it a great work by the artist or a middling work by the artist? But certainly it's not an easy process. And actually, the very fact that in an auction, 30% of the time, the works will fetch double the estimate. We get it wrong a lot of the time.
Well, in terms of Bonhams as an auction house, you're certainly going after different clients. You're certainly looking at different art markets. We're in the room right now, we're looking at Japanese art. Downstairs you have some vintage cars. How big of a chunk is contemporary African art on your bottom line?
The contemporary African art market is still a small market. But I will say of a lot of the markets we're involved in, it's one of the ones that's growing the fastest, which is what makes it worthy of attention.
Talk to me about how investable some of these pieces are. What are the price points?
It is investable, you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of buyers nowadays, when they're buying one with one hand on their heart and one on their head. They're thinking, well, what is this piece going to be worth and what could it be worth in 5-10 years' time? The record price for a piece of contemporary African art is a work we sold a year or two ago by Elana Tsui. He's a Ghanaian artist, lives in Nigeria. It's called New World Map, and we sold it for just over £500,000, which is quite a lot of money. I mean, it's not a huge amount of money when one looks at the contemporary art market in general. You've got works for going 30, 40 million pounds, but certainly in the African art market, it's quite a lot of money. So that is probably the sort of top end of the range. I would say most of the works tend to fetch between about 5,000 and sort of 30,000. That's the sort of general range for the works. Now, I hope that in 3, 4, 5 years' time, that might have moved up to between sort of 20 and 80,000. I'm not enormously keen for it to have a sort of stratospheric rise like the contemporary Chinese market did, because that's, I think, rather unhealthy. And certainly in that market we've seen it rise very steeply, but also now come down quite steeply as well.
What are some of the challenges in doing what you do? You're not working often directly with artists, you're working with collectors. Are there some logistical challenges to getting some of that art off the continent?
It's fraught with challenges, and that is dealing with Africa, and that's what makes it fun. Yes, it is. I mean, for example, as you're probably aware at the moment, there's this whole Ebola business. We're currently trying to get a picture out of Sierra Leone, not proving easy. Freight rates from Sierra Leone have rocketed over the past 3 months, and a picture that was going to cost us, I don't know, £800 to fly out is going to cost us probably £2,500 to get out. I mean, we'll get it sorted, but there are always challenges in Africa, and be it Ebola in Sierra Leone, or I don't know, whatever, getting a picture out of South Africa and trying to get through all the customs procedures. It's always difficult and it's always a challenge, but it's fun. It's great fun and I love it.
Talk to me about some of the worries that you may have. Obviously, we've had the global financial crisis and that hit the art market as a whole pretty hard.
Yeah.
How have you seen that impacting contemporary African art?
Actually, for South Africa, the South African art market, you wouldn't have known anything had happened. I mean, in 2010 or 11 was probably the height of the market, and that was very much very different from the rest of the art market in general, but for South Africa that was the case. With regard to contemporary African art, again, I don't think that at the time of when the markets really plummeted, it wasn't developed enough for it to be hit. So we haven't really seen much of a dip. There was a problem we had in Nigeria when a lot of the banks were lending to each other and then everything collapsed, and that was, I think, about 2009, but they recovered pretty quickly. So we haven't seen too much of a problem in that way.
Giles, thank you so much for joining CNBC.
Pleasure.